Welcome everyone to Rewind with Rosa. I've been absent a few weeks. As you know, I've been a bit of a one-eyed warrior with the eye surgery, but I'm delighted to be back. And I'm delighted today to be presenting Rewind with Rosa from the Golden Vine with Kevin Skone, the Publican, and Mick Johnston from Treasury Wine. He markets Treasury Wines all through Central Victoria. So they've come here today with me, or I've come to their place to talk about some of the things that go on here at the Golden Vine Hotel. And Mick's going to talk about a lovely drop of Pinot that he's kindly shared with us today, Cape Shank, and a little bit about the other sorts of wines that are sold. So I'll introduce you to Kevin, and he can have a bit of a chat about the pub.
Well, how are you, Rosa?
I'm a bit better than I have been in recent weeks, so yes. I'm getting there.
Well, thanks for coming to the Golden Vine. Wonderful to see you. We've just had a busy lunch today. Well, probably having around 20 people to the numbers that we've got at the minute, which is quite a good turnout. Golden Vine has been here for, well, the original building was here from around 1875, and it's been a pub ever since. One of the oldest pubs in Bendigo, which is terrific, and it's seen an interesting past, but it's one of those pubs that is probably not the norm. It's quite alternative in its way. So really, and it suited me down the ground because it's a sort of pub that you can do anything in. We have a pub choir, we do a pub church, we have trivia night, we have live music, we do $10 lunches, we have a standard menu, we have a beer garden, we have anything that anyone wants to do within this place. We run it as a community venue.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because when I first came here, I was intrigued by your pub choir, and you said that was very similar to where you'd come from in Wales in terms of having the same constituents, the church and the pub having the same sort of clientele, really.
Well, there was a lady called Kath came in to me to see me, and I was sitting here in the afternoon. And she said, "Have you heard about pub choir?" And I said, "No, but I'm in." Was what I said.
Sounds like our conversation.
Right, straight away. So, I mean, I went to sleep on this stuff, obviously being born in Wales and born in a pub, being brought up in a pub. I think I was 9 months old when my parents bought their first pub. And of course, remembering, going to sleep on all these guys who had been out there on the farms or in the mines and stuff during the course of the day, coming in and obviously singing, because that was pretty much the only form of entertainment that we had back in the day. And of course there was and then my father, of course, who was a real character, Dad. Well, my mum was the first string soldier. And then there was
not
Dad,
like most marriages,
who got out there, and I never forget Dad turning around to me, and he was one of these guys that always wanted to have atmosphere in the pub, because it was a pub with no atmosphere. It's not a pub. And I'll never forget him coming behind the bar one day, and he said to me, "Kev, smash a glass." I said, "What for?" He said, "Just smash a glass." So I smashed this glass. And he said, "Oh, you went like that?" And then, of course, these people in the corner said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Oh, well, look, he said he's just smashed the glass. And what's the matter with you?" And this, that, and the other. And they started talking. And these guys started laughing, and they started laughing.
So atmosphere.
So the atmosphere just started. So I kind of use the philosophy now, there's no atmosphere in your pub, smash a glass. And it always works.
Well, can I say that the first time I came here, for whatever reason, I just loved it. I loved how it wasn't pitched too high, it wasn't pitched too low. And I felt so comfortable that I bring clients here, I bring my mum here, bring my kids here who are over there somewhere. So it really, to me, I didn't grow up with that pub tradition. I had an Italian background, so I didn't grow up with that pub tradition. To me, it really is like just like a little community hub. You can come with your friends for lunch, your mum for lunch, your granny, anyone. So
it's how we based it. Because really, my view on pubs, and I haven't been involved in them for so many years. Yes, there's alcohol. Yes, there's food. Yes, there's facilities. But really, at the end of the day, pubs have always been successful. They've been businesses for centuries now. And they will always continue, because as long as communities are around and as long as the people that are behind the bar treated as a community unit, they'll be successful.
Yeah. And look, your food is great. I have to say, I drove past the first time and saw the $10 lunch and went, I'll give that a go. And the food was great. The $10 lunch is generous. And then I had some other, obviously a normal menu, and your cooks are good. So I'm not getting commission for this, but I'm just saying it's reasonable price lunch, because the thing that annoys me, you just want to pop out for lunch with your mum. You don't want to spend $60. You just want to spend, $30, $30 with a few drinks and get good grub. So good on you.
Again, we're in the market now, especially doing the lunchtime trade. And I remember having this conversation a few years back. But really, at the end of the day, the dollar's pretty tight now.
Yeah.
And, people don't want to be spending $60
for a lunch with your mum. Yeah, it's a special lunch then maybe, but not just a bite while you're out shopping. And
we have to understand, as pubs, we're not just in competition with pubs anymore. We're in competition with bars, cafes, restaurants, Woolies, Aldi's, McDonald's, Netflix, anyone. Like, we are in competition with everyone.
Uber Eats.
So Uber Eats, the whole lot. So we have to really have a bit of a broader way. People just don't come in anymore and sit there, and you don't see the barflies anymore.
I would not have stopped here if I hadn't seen a $10 lunch. I know that sounds terrible, but I've never been here before. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Let's give it a go.
And look at you now. You're almost
I'm here every week. I know. It's a bit embarrassing. All right. Let's introduce Mick. Thank you. You're going to come back and join us at the end. But,
Shall I go now?
You can go. You can come. That's right. And Mick's going to talk about this beautiful Pinot that we're drinking, a little bit about Treasury Wine.
Thanks, Rosa. G'day, everyone. My name's Mick. I work for Treasury Wines. Just to give you a bit of background on Treasury Wines, we have around 3,500 employees globally. We have around 13,000 hectares of vines, or 32,500 acres. We are located in 4 regions, being Australia, New Zealand, the Americas, Europe and Asia, in over 70 countries. So it's quite big business. We have a lot of well-known brands like Penfold, Whiffglass, Pepperjack. That's sort of more Australian, and then obviously interstate wine, international wines. The Squilling Pig, the Matuas, the Secret Stones, the New Zealand segments. So we have some of the oldest wineries here in Australia. I think Penfold's was 1874 and Lindeman's 1875. So quite old vines, and and a very established business. So today we're
delicious, by the way.
I'll just put the bottle in front of the camera if I may. We're doing, I don't know if you can get a close up on that, but Cape Schenk Pinot Noir. So Cape Schenk is actually abbreviated to, the sailor's abbreviation to top gallant, which is the top sail of a square rigger. Hence why on the label there's like the picture of a lighthouse and that sort of ocean kind of view. So the pioneers of Togallant actually went through the Mornington area in 1994. So it's a bit of a younger vineyard compared to the 1874. But what they did is they came across, and it's lovely. They came across an apple vineyard, and they saw just how magnificent the backdrop looked. They made an offer to the farmer, and obviously an offer they couldn't refuse, and they bought it. Togallant were the pioneers in Australia of Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris. So
my other favourite wine.
So good in summer. Pinot, Well, and subsequently they're the biggest growing varietals on the market at the moment is Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Grigio.
So lovely in summer, Pinot Grigio. So
exactly. They're very fruity, very light, crisp. So that was back in '94. And then after the Pinot Gris and Grigios, and they expanded into the Pinot Noir, and also now they do sparklings like Prosecco, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and things like Moscato, which is that sweet tooth.
Yeah, the sweet tooth. My niece loves Moscato. So
it definitely suits a younger demographic.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I was drinking sweet reds when I was younger,
and
now
it
does. Yes. So this Pinot, it's it's a really bright, sweet fruit, perfumed with ripe red berries.
It's really
and it's got that sort of spiciness. In
it's not pepper. Is there a pepper?
Well, that'd be the spiciness that we're picking up there. Yeah. So spices can generally refer to quite a lot of different things. Pepper is one of those. So it's it's just that really easy drinking wine. Pinot Noir is becoming much more successful now because it is very versatile with seasons. So you can drink it in the summer.
But you can also and have it with lots of different foods. You can have that with seafood and chicken.
Correct.
And,
Yeah.
whereas before it was a very heavy Shiraz with the meat, and then white with the
exactly right.
Whereas this is really, you can have it across whatever.
100%. So ideally, like pork and duck and those sort of lighter meats, but things like curries and pizza, like it's just
beautiful.
Versatile with food, versatile with season. So Pinot Noir, you typically serve at a cooler temperature. Okay. So generally 10 to 12 degrees, where most red wine is 16, 17
Well, I
degrees.
read that somewhere that, in red wine in Australia shouldn't be served at room temperature, because red wine originated in Europe where the room temperature was 16 to 20 degrees, whereas ours is 40 degrees.
Yes,
so,
correct, exactly.
So you should just take a little bit of the edge off it. So,
for sure. So, and that's why, even in summer, this Pinot Noir is great because you can whack it in the fridge, half an hour before drinking, and it's just, that's that optimum drinking temperature. So, Okay.
So Mick services the whole of North Central Victoria.
Yeah, so from Kyneton up to Mildura, right through to Hay and Nillaquin, and all in between. So, if you say living in suburbs, I've got a quick list down here, but if you live in suburbs such as obviously Bendigo, Kyneton, Barham, Shepparton, New Mercer, and Moama, there's plenty of places up there that support this wine that's on premise. Lots of big venues too, like Rich River Golf Club, a great venue of mine up there, and obviously Kevin here at the Golden Vine. He is a great supporter of mine and Treasury Wines. So
he says you're a great supporter of his, so that's
it's a two-way street.
All right, well, thank you. We'll come back at the end. We'll have a glass of wine.
Yeah,
together.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosa.
Okay, so now let's talk about some cases of this week. But I just want to talk a little bit before we move on, and Maddie's helping me today with the slides, is that I really thought it was important during this time that we work together with some of the local businesses. Everyone is doing it. I know everyone's sick of hearing it, but everyone is doing it tough. And particularly places like food and beverage places, which have either had to close down completely or have got such strong limitations on the number of people they can have. It's affected their overheads, their viability ridiculously. So I'm delighted to be able to try and expose Kevin and Mick to a broader audience, and hopefully that benefits everybody. So let's move on to some cases. There's been a lot going on. There's always a lot going on in this space. So, when I do all this online stuff, people say, do you have enough content? And I go, I've got so much content and I want to die. I mean, there's cases every day. There's legislation changes every day. So in the last week, we've had the new wage theft legislation has been passed, and that means that underpayments is going to become a criminal offence in Victoria. We've had, please go back a bit, Maddie. No? We've had the manslaughter legislation take effect, and that again has sent shivers through a lot of employers. We've had minimum wages have increased. We've had work pay, if some of you have seen my earlier seminars, WorkPack is going to take the Rosato decision to the High Court. That's pretty exciting. Thanks, Maddie. Let's talk about wages theft. Wages theft is not new, and it's covered by the Fair Work Act, and the Fair Work Ombudsman chases and prosecutes people who underpay or employers who underpay. However, there's been quite a movement to say that what's been going on with the Fair Work Act isn't strong enough, and it's not a strong enough deterrent to stop people from underpaying. You would have seen in recent times some really big decisions against employers, but obviously employers and big employers like Woolworths, etc., have decided it's worth taking the risk to underpay their staff. And the Ombudsman has been pursuing them. But as I was in a Fair Work conciliation this morning, and the Commissioner said, at the moment, the Ombudsman is being smashed. They are so busy with all of the stuff with JobKeeper, all of the stuff that's going on, that it's a very difficult time. So if you had an underpayments claim, it might take a year or two for you even to get it heard. So there's been a very big push to bring in legislation to not just make it a civil penalty, which is what it is under the Fair Work Act, but to make it a criminal penalty. So the criminal penalty can have fines of up to almost $1 million for businesses and up to $200,000 for individuals. Significant, as well as up to 10 years jail for employers in breach. So you watch yourself, Kevin. Don't you be underpaying your staff. You don't have any JobKeeper. So the offences that are covered by this legislation include dishonestly withholding at least part of employee entitlement. That might be overtime or penalty rates or something like, or superannuation. Falsifying an employee entitlement record to dishonestly obtain or cover up a financial advantage. Again, those of you who joined me recently will have seen that case where I can't remember the employer, I think it was a sushi cafe, had falsified the records, and they had falsified the employee records to cover up. And the Fair Work Ombudsman got the biggest penalty they had ever received in terms of prosecuting an employer. Failing to keep an employee entitlement record to dishonestly obtain or cover up. So you have to keep your employee records. But if you do it with the intention of trying to cover up stealing from them, well, then once again, there's no sort of pity in this sort of legislation. Thanks, Maddie. So there's going to be a new Victorian Wage Inspectorate and a Commissioner, much like the Fair Work Ombudsman. The Fair Work Ombudsman was created out of the Fair Work Act. It had a lot of power, has a lot of power. It's got an inspectorate, it's got a commissioner. And similar to the Ombudsman, it's got very strong powers. They've got the right to enter premises. They've got the right to gather evidence. They can execute search warrants. They can target employers who falsify records or to hide underpayments. The approach is to try and deter employers by imposing, I'm having a bit more of this lovely pinot, by imposing a criminal sanction, including a pecuniary penalty, which means like a fine, as well as imprisonment. And it's probably a little bit of a recognition that, as I said earlier, the Fair Work Act, while it does have quite strong powers and quite strong penalties, doesn't seem to be deterring employers. Interestingly, the federal government is developing its own laws to criminalise wage theft. It's a softer regime. That's probably all I'll say at this point because there's not much out on it. Porter, who is the Industrial Relations Minister, has been quite critical of the state government's regime, but you might expect that given that it's a coalition federal government and a state, a Labor state government. They're going to have more of a self-reporting regime, apparently. Thanks, Maddie. Next one. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is what has obviously, once again, caused a little bit of angst amongst employers, that the manslaughter legislation is going to take effect as of the 1st of July. So the manslaughter legislation, there's always been really strong penalties for employers who put their employees at risk. But this is one step further. Once again, it's really upping the ante to protect employees in the workplace. So workplace manslaughter applies when all of the elements of the offence are proven. Firstly, that the accused is a company or a person who is not an employer or a volunteer. The accused owed the victim, the employee, a duty of care pursuant to the legislation. So employers owe their employees a duty of care. The accused, the employer, breached that duty by criminal negligence where there was a high risk of death, serious injury or serious illness. One of my clients is, the way I sort of try and explain this is one of my clients is a mining company and they do underground mine detonating underground mines. And you can see that workplace is a very high risk workplace. So there's different levels of risk. I mean, another one of my clients is a hairdresser. I mean, the level of risk is much lower in a hairdressing salon than in an underground mining site. So again, it's really going to be dependent. The act that breached the duty of care was committed consciously and voluntarily, and the accused's breach, so the employer's breach, caused the victim's death. Thanks, Maddie. So who can be charged? As we've said, it's a person, a body corporate, and it's someone who owes the applicable duties to ensure the health and safety of another person in the workplace. It doesn't have to be an employee. The health and safety legislation is very broad. It includes visitors, it includes volunteers, it includes anyone actually on the site. So go back to my mining site. If I attend the site to visit my client and I get blown up through negligence, and that could have the sorts of legal consequences I'm talking about today. So in certain circumstances, however, not only can the organisation be held liable, actual officers of the organisation can also be held liable. This is where people get incredibly anxious, and rightly so. So if it's the directors and secretaries of the organisation, if they knowingly allow the breaches to continue, partners of a joint venture, trustee of a trust, persons who participate in making of decisions, so maybe they're in the occult and safety team or the HR managers, persons who have the capacity to significantly affect the organisation's financial standing, so that'd be chief operating officer, etc. So all of these sorts of officers can be held personally liable for the breach and attract the sorts of penalties I was talking about earlier. Thanks, Maddie. Negligent conduct. Voluntary and deliberate conduct is negligent if it involves a great falling short of the standard of care that a reasonable person would have exercised in the circumstances. So it's the whole sort of, the objective test. Has it fallen so far short that a reasonable person would expect a certain standard of care in a high risk of death, serious injury, in circumstances that involve a high risk? Again, my mining company compared to the hairdresser. It can include a failure to act. So examples of negligent conduct can include when a person does not adequately manage, control or supervise its employees. Again, one of my clients has a lot of industrial machinery. So if it either doesn't have a qualified person supervising or doesn't train its employees effectively, that failure can also be, they can also be held liable. And when it does not take reasonable action to fix a dangerous situation, where again the circumstances not to fix a situation causes a high risk of death. Again, maybe they know that the workplace is unsafe, or they had a report that the workplace is unsafe and they do nothing to fix that workplace. There's got to be a link of causation. In most legal sort of doctrines, there's a causation link. It must be established that it was the accused or the employer's negligent breach of his duty of care that caused the death. So there's got to be a link between the act or the failure to act and the death. The penalties, as I've said, workplace manslaughter, a maximum of 20 years imprisonment for individuals, a maximum fine of $16.5 million for body corporates. Huge penalties. No wonder people are feeling a bit nervous. Thanks, Maddie. Minimum wage decision. There has been a lot of debate around the traps, unions, employer groups, etc., employers. With the COVID, what's the Fair Work Commission going to do with the annual minimum wage review? They brought down their decision. Employers were calling for a pay freeze due to COVID's impact on business. We can understand that. Most businesses at the moment, or a lot of businesses, can't afford to pay their staff, let alone give them a pay increase. Unions argued for a 4% rise to stimulate the economy. They're saying if you give people more money, then they're going to go out and spend the money. Decision was a 1.75% or a $13 per week increase. The new minimum wage will be $753.80 or an increase or a $19.84 per hour. Look, it's been really interesting because the Fair Work Commission has taken quite a cautious approach. You can see they're actually under half of what the unions were seeking. But not only that, usually, as many of you would know, the minimum wage increase takes place 1st of July. But what they've done, the Fair Work Commission has done this time, is stagger the increases. And the idea is that the economic environment is such at the moment that they wanted it to allow people to, on JobKeeper, JobSeeker, coming off those sorts of regimes, to be then able to access the minimum wage increases. Thanks, Maddie. So as I said, it's a phased approach. 1st of July, frontline healthcare workers, social assistants, teachers and childcare workers will get the increase. 1st of September 2020, construction, manufacturing and other industries will get the increases. 1st of February 2021, and probably again this is a reflection of how tough accommodation and food services and arts businesses have found it during COVID. Their increases don't take effect until 1st of February 2021. Please go. Before we go on to Rosato, the Fair Work Ombudsman worksite is an excellent resource to look at your award, to look at your situation, and to see when your increases will take effect. Those of you who follow my my little podcast, my little webinars, will see that I spoke a few weeks ago about Rosato. This is again a case that sent shockwaves through employer groups. It's quite an astounding decision. I'll repeat the facts for those of you who haven't heard the facts before. Robert Rosato was a coal mining worker, or is a coal mining worker. He was engaged as a casual through WorkPack, which is an employment agency. He was employed on 6 consecutive employment contracts over almost 4 years. Now, as an employment lawyer, my antenna go up there and go, well, why would you do that? Put him on permanent. I'm not a big fan of casual, and those of you who come to my seminars will know that. I think put people on permanent unless they are a true casual, which is erratic, irregular hours, not regular hours. So Maddie works for me, and she only does 20 hours a week, but rather than have her as casual, I put her on permanent part-time so that her hours are regular, she's got some security and certainty, and I don't get hit with the Rosato decision. But let's go through. He ran a case to say, well, obviously as a casual, he gets 25% casual loading, but he ran a case to say that because he was working effectively like a permanent employee, he should get all the entitlements that permanent employees get, i.e. annual leave, sick pay, compassionate leave, etc. And look, astoundingly, he won. This is following on from the skiing decision, I think it's a couple of years ago now. That was the first decision. So WorkPack, rather than challenging the skiing decision, decided to try their luck with Rosato. They lost with Rosato as well as they lost with skiing. So the federal court ruled that Rosato was in fact a permanent WorkPack employee entitled to be paid annual personal carers leave, compassionate leave, plus payment for public holidays and the Christmas shutdown period. So, thanks, Maddie. In effect, it's repeated twice, not quite sure there. Let's just go to Justice Morty Bromberg, the third point. Basically, what employers are saying is, why should Rosato, my children might join this in a moment, I'm not sure. What they're saying is, why should he be able to double dip? Why should he get the 25% loading as well now as get all the entitlements? But, you know, it was up against Justices Morty Bromberg, Richard White and Michael Wheelahan. So all of you who work in this space will know that Morty Bromberg in particular is a fairly pro-employee type of judge. So that's not a surprising decision coming from him. So they said that he was, as I said, a permanent employee, entitled to paid annual personal and all those other leaves and the Christmas shutdown. Thanks, Maddie. Although WorkPack offered him a casual employment contract, and it said very clearly in the contract that he was a casual, and that was his status, that he was not entitled to annual leave, he was not entitled to any other entitlements, they found that his regular, predictable working arrangements meant that he was an employee entitled to benefits that permanent employees get. Rosato was, in fact, a permanent WorkPack employee entitled to all of those entitlements. Thanks, Maddie. What's going on now is, those of you who know the court hierarchy, this was first heard in the federal court, single judge, went to the full court, and this is where Morty Bromberg et al. Heard it. Now, WorkPack have sought special leave to appeal the decision to the High Court. So you can't just go to the High Court, you've got to actually seek permission to have your matter heard in the High Court, and it's got to be for reasons of importance or setting a big precedent, which this is what this is doing. So they've sought that leave. The issue is, this is why people are very anxious, this decision could expose employers to more than $14 billion in back pay. And as I've said, it's been called double dipping. Morrison, pretty much straight away after the decision, foreshadowed a change of legislation. So I would expect that if the High Court supports the decision of the full bench of the federal court, I wouldn't be surprised to see Morrison make a change to the legislation to counter what he has certainly called double dipping. That's my summary of the cases for the week. Kevin might come back and have a glass of wine with me or a glass of hot chocolate. My recommendation in this space, things are changing at a rate of knots. Even me, who lives and breathes employment law and has done for nearly 30 years, has found it very hard to keep up in recent times. So when in doubt, get legal advice, get it early and get it often. You might spend some money, a little bit of money up front in getting the advice, but it might save you an awful lot of money down the track in either an unfair dismissal case or any of it. I mean, you don't want to be in the Fair Work Commission. You don't want to be in the federal court. You don't want to be any of those places. Come, Kevin. So where can you find me? My website is there. Where can you find Kevin? Where are you located, Kevin? You're in King Street, aren't you?
135 King Street in Bendigo.
And I think Kevin might give you a little bit of a, if you mention this and you come in, he might give you a 10% off or something like that, or some little special thing for...
Maybe the best way to do, if you're really looking for good discount and to drive a very hard bargain, is to talk to this lady. It's blood and stone scenario.
Anyway, mention this webinar and Kevin will look after you. But support local, come down to your local pub, have fun, have a wine, try this beautiful Cape Shank, and you can also call Mick and get hold of Mick if you're a retail outlet or you want to get his wine in your pub. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, Betty. See you next time.